Happy Tuesday to you. Today on the Locked On Blue Jay podcast, trade deadline day, plus Hyun-jin Ryu returns today, and it's Trivia Tuesday. We're packed, so let's get into it.
You are Locked On Blue Jays, your daily Toronto Blue Jays podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, friends. Craig Ballard, Locked On Blue Jays. Yes, indeed. Been Locked On Toronto Blue Jay baseball since I can remember. Big-time Blue Jay fan. I hope you would agree. Knowledgeable Blue Jay fan. Certainly a passionate Blue Jay fan. Toronto Blue Jay baseball is a big deal for me. It's a big deal for my family. So I certainly thank you and appreciate that you're spending part of your day talking Blue Jay baseball with me. The Locked On Blue Jay podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to remind you, of course, all the Blue Jay action this season available for you to take in on SiriusXM. And if you're taking in today's episode on the Locked On Blue Jay YouTube page, hello and thank you for that. Please hit that subscribe if you haven't already. And to the everydayers, making the Locked On Blue Jay podcast your first podcast listen every day. Just seeing great growth on the podcast side. Can't thank you enough for that. I know a lot of you are helping expand, helping the Locked On Blue Jay podcast grow. You're putting it in the hands of your family, your friends, your coworkers that you know are Blue Jay fans. I always joke, your Uber driver's a Blue Jay fan. I mean, you name it, right? Help spread the word about the Locked On Blue Jay podcast, and you're doing that, and that is much appreciated. Now, first segment today, let's get set for the return of Hyunjin Ryu. Second segment, let's talk trade deadline, and then Trivia Tuesday. And for Trivia Tuesday, St. Louis and Toronto, hey, these two have gotten together a couple times, right, over the last little while. So some of the questions are about other trades between those two teams. Plus, with the Orioles in town, we'll have some Jays-Orioles trivia as well. June 1st, 2022. Shout out to my mom. That is her birthday, June 1st. So definitely let's start there. Anytime I see that date, of course, I'm thinking of my mom. But June 1st, 2022, that is the last time that the Toronto Blue Jays saw Hyunjin Ryu on the mound for them. Makes his return. Now, it's been a long and winding road. Yes, his return isn't out of nowhere. Like what I mean is he's had some measured progress, some measured moments, measured recoveries. He's come back up through actually 3 different levels at the minors to end up now back on the big league level. All told, 18 innings pitched over those 3 levels. The 3 levels were rookie ball, A ball, and then the last couple starts he made at AAA. In those 18 innings, 4 runs allowed, 13 hits, but 16 walks and just 1 strikeout. No, I mean, as we said there, some of that was against rookie ball, some of that's against A ball, even the AAA. I mean, it's not indicative necessarily of big league hitters, right? But so some of those stats, 13 hits, only 4 runs in the 18 innings. Some of that we'll take with a grain of salt, but certainly pounding the strike zone and being an effective strike thrower, I mean, that plays on any level, including the big league level. So that part is very encouraging to have seen from Hyunjin Ryu. The entire time that we've seen Hyunjin Ryu as a Toronto Blue Jay, I think we would have to openly admit here, for having an open and honest conversation, that we have seen him regress. We have seen him trend downwards. Now, he's an impending free agent. I really thought that Hyunjin Ryu was done with the Toronto Blue Jays. It does remain to be seen, of course, how he can contribute to the rest for the 2023 Blue Jays the rest of the season. I don't think there's any scenario where he's a Toronto Blue Jay after this season, his impending free agent. I don't think there's any way the Toronto Blue Jays re-up with him. All due respect to Hyunjin Ryu. And by the way, even if he comes back right now and can't contribute to the 2023 Blue Jays, so he really is done with the Blue Jays. Even if that was the case, Hyunjin Ryu played an important part in the Shapiro and Atkins era. They were the first. He was their first, big name, big game hunting, big fish that they reeled in. And you remember Scott Boras, really, for one, one of the major agents there. For one, he really changed his tune on the Toronto Blue Jays and management, in particular Shapiro and Atkins on management at that time. Because he said, that's a real indicator that they are willing, and in particular, Rogers is willing to spend some money to bring in quality players to be willing to and wanting to compete in this extremely competitive American League East. So Hyunjin Ryu is always going to be a positive, in my opinion anyway, in Toronto Blue Jay lore. Now, when I say we've seen him regress over as a Blue Jay, really I'm talking about him against right-handed batters, and really take your mind's eye back to the last time we saw Ryu. Where was he really completely ineffective? And it led to all his problems. In my opinion, anyway, it led to his problems. He was just completely ineffective on the inside part of the plate to right-handed batters. Could not hit his spots there. Many times he would have the batters set up to pound that fastball. And, that fastball, it's barely 90 miles per hour. So for Ryu, he has to be deceiving with you. He has to be mixing his pitches and mixing his spots. When he, veteran, he's noticing that right-handed batter is picking up stuff and looking for stuff outside. He'll jam that fastball pinpoint, practically walk it up and place it on the inside corner. It's so pinpoint. That's when he's at his best for that inside strike, that inside effectiveness to righties. It has not been there, at least as the last time we saw him. That part of his game was really regressing. You look at 2020, Hyunjin Ryu. I mean, that's a shortened season, right? That's the COVID shortened season. But righties hit just 238 versus Ryu, had 5 home runs versus Ryu in 2020. Again, I know it was a shortened season for the 5 home runs, but even the next season, 2021, righties had 22 home runs against him. That's a big number, and they hit 259. So righties were starting to hit him in 2021. And then last season, just before the injury, and he went out, I mean, my goodness, righties were at 308, and he had allowed 5 homers. He only made 6 starts. He got hurt in that 6th start. That June 1st start was his 6th start. So he'd only made 5 starts. He'd already given up 5 home runs just to righties alone last season. Again, they're hitting over 308. They're hitting over 300 against him. It was completely ineffective on the inside corner of the plate to the righties. Now, what's the cause for optimism? I don't know if you had a chance to see him in the minors. And again, we're going to preface it that we get it was against minor league batters. But the point being, we wanted to see that control. We wanted to see him back being effective on the inside part of the plate to righties, and he was. That's actually, I mean, literally my cause for optimism. If he can do that on the big league level, I mean, you're going to see home runs from Hyunjin Ryu. In his best times with the Blue Jays, he's a home run per start pitcher. He averages a little over, actually, in his time as a Blue Jay, a little over 1 home run per start. And in those minor league games, by the way, he pitched 11 innings total at AAA. So there's your best indicator, almost practically major league hitters. Pitched 11 innings in AAA, gave up 3 home runs. So let's understand, we're going to see balls leave the ballpark from Hyunjin Ryu. The key is going to be very similar to what we talked about with Jose Barrios, very similar to what we talked about with Yusei Kikuchi. How is his control and his command and his strategy, the way he's been able to set up and then effectively execute his pitches on the previous batters? Because if that home run is a solo home run, not going to be the end of the day. Not going to be the end of the day at all. If it's a 2-run home run, can't like that. But it's when he gets into those 3 runs, they can't like the 2 or the 3-run home runs. That's when Ryu's going to get himself into trouble. So we'll watch that closely tonight. I mean, I'm absolutely saying Baltimore will get at least 1 home run tonight. They might even get 2. If they're solo shots, boy, I feel like the Blue Jays can weather that storm. But something very important to keep an eye on tonight. Overall, I'm excited about having Hyunjin Ryu back. That surprises me. As I say, everydayers will know I've thought this season that he was done as a Toronto Blue Jay, and it's not just having him back. That's not the cause for optimism. Again, it's specifically what we've seen from Ryu. What was just killing him prior to him being out? That inside corner to righties. Well, it looks like that he might be back doing really well with that. And you know what he even said? I even saw him maybe a week and a half ago or so now. I mean, just a little while ago, I actually even saw him acknowledging that, saying that it was because of his injury issues. He was getting a little bit beat down, body-wise. I don't know if you've seen him. He's back. He's in great shape. So he was getting beat up from body-wise. He's addressed that. He's taken care of that. And he's even said physically, he's able to finish off, I believe is the way he was describing. He's able to finish off those pitches that on the inside corner to righties. There's nothing that's going to be a bigger deal. There's nothing that's going to be a bigger indicator to is Hyunjin Ryu back than that inside corner. That's what we need to watch tonight, that inside corner to righties. And again, part 2 of what we need to watch is he's going to give up home runs. Will they be solo home runs, or are they going to be crooked numbers that land the Blue Jays in a lot of trouble? Going to be opposed tonight by righty Kyle Bradish. 6-6 record, 3.29 ERA, been decent on the road, but he's been great at home. So, I mean, speaking of great at home, he actually pitched at home. He pitched in Baltimore against the Blue Jays back on June 11th, 7-inning gem. It was the only game this season that the Blue Jays had beaten Baltimore coming into this series. And it was, Bradish pitched 7 innings, gave up just 1 run on 4 hits, no walks, but he gave up a 6th-inning home run to Whit Merrifield, and that was the only run he gave up, but he still got tagged for the loss that game. Tough luck on that one. The Baltimore Orioles are 6-5 in Bradish's road starts, and the Orioles, my goodness, man, we were mentioning yesterday, the Baltimore Orioles have been sensational on the road. I'm blown away, actually, by what they've been able to do away from home. Bo and Vladdy, they are each 5 for 15 versus Bradish in their career. Vladdy has homered. Bo has homered twice. I hope that the Bo part of that means something, but don't we have to acknowledge it probably doesn't? That injury yesterday, I'm trying not to really dwell too much. As we tape this right now, we don't know the full extent of that Bo injury, but if we're having an open, honest conversation, did not look at it, and I don't want to bring the mood of this podcast or my own mood down, so we won't until we know, for sure about Bo. But yeah, certainly very concerned there. Now, how about a batter that needs to get going? I mean, we can have a whole segment here on how George Springer is struggling lately. I know he's not having a record-setting slump right now because somebody would have mentioned it, but for me personally, I'll say I've never seen a slump like the one George Springer is in right now. Well, Bradish offers the cure for what ails George Springer. Springer's 7 for 14 with 4 doubles and a home run against Bradish. I'm going to say it again because it's been a while since you've heard good news, since you've heard something positive about George Springer, since you've heard cause for optimism about George Springer. So in his career versus Kyle Bradish, George Springer in 14 at-bats has got a hit half of those times, 7 for 14, and 4 of those 7 hits were doubles and 1 was a home run. George Springer's going to get back on track tonight. And well, you know what? Yeah, I was going to say I was going to temper that and say at least this is a pitcher that can get him back on track. But let's have some guts here on the Locked On Blue Jays podcast, right? Let's just say George Springer is getting back on track tonight. Ryu has only ever pitched 4 innings in his career to Alejandro Kirk, but Kirk is hot. Plus, he's 5 for 10 in his career versus Bradish. So, yes, I certainly assume we're going to see Danny Jansen behind the plate tonight. That's Ryu's guy. But I'm looking to see Alejandro Kirk in this lineup. Might mean no belt, but I'm looking for Alejandro Kirk in this lineup tonight. Bradish, he features a slider this season. Now, it's been an absolute fire for him. He's got 49 strikeouts on his slider alone. That if you're reading slider and you're the Toronto Blue Jays tonight and there's less than 2 strikes, I mean, if there's 2 strikes, you have to protect. I get it. But if there's less than 2 strikes and you're reading slider, full breaks, lay off. It's not about something. It's not a slider that's about to hang there and be dealt with. That's not what Bradish's slider's been doing this year. It's been way on point. His curveball has also been an effective pitch. He's getting strikeouts with the curve as well. So you want to, if you're reading spin tonight and it's less than 2 strikes, you do want to be avoiding these pitches. Righties will see a lot of hard sinkers from Bradish. Lefties will see a lot of changeups. Now, both of those pitches have been hit very well. Those are the pitches you want to look for tonight. And in particular, the key for the lefties and the righties tonight, Bradish's fastball. That's his main pitch, but that is absolutely the one you want to pick out and be ready to do damage against tonight. Coming up on the Locked On Blue Jay podcast, we take our final look at what the Blue Jays could do as the trade deadline is today. Now, first I wanted to mention I'm going to the Blue Jays game tonight. I've got my ticket. As per usual, use the Game Time app for that. Hyun-jin Ryu's return. I wanted to be there. I'm intrigued. I wanted to see this. And of course, yes, everydayers will know if I'm going to the Blue Jay game, how did I get my ticket? I use the Game Time app. Buying tickets to your favorite events, shouldn't be stressful. Game Time is a fast and easy way to buy tickets for all sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. Killer deals on last-minute tickets and the best price guarantee. You can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun you're about to have. My own personal experience, I've used it, and this is the 5th game I've been to this season. Use the Game Time app every single time. Got the Jansen and Romano bobblehead thanks to the Game Time app as well. Why I use it and what I appreciate is you get an image of the seat view, so I like that, and you buy the tickets in a matter of seconds. It's 2 taps and you're all set. It is that easy. The tickets are sent directly to your phone. You just show the phone to the ticket taker at the venue and then enjoy your game, enjoy your show, whatever you used it for. It is that simple. For me, that's important. I'm not good at these things, so that's important. I also appreciate the Game Time guarantee. Now, the Game Time guarantee means if you find tickets in the same section and same row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. It's the fastest growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONMLB. That's going to get you $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Now, again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Now, today is the trade deadline, and we've had a lot of fun these past few days talking Toronto Blue Jay trade deadline topics. And for the final time, let's get into some hopes I still have remaining and some things that could be still on the table for the Toronto Blue Jays. Now, again, at the time of taping this, it seems like Tim Anderson just became extremely likely, if he wasn't already, to become a Toronto Blue Jay. Devastating, at least devastating looking injury to Bo Bichette, right? We'll hold out hope that it could be okay. I'm extremely nervous that he's out for this season. I wonder about next season. Anyway, I'm going off. Anyway, I'm getting too upset. I don't know. Right here, right now, as I tape this, I don't know the particulars. So, but Tim Anderson was looking like he's somebody that could have been on the Toronto Blue Jay radar anyway. He's got to be somebody that's on the Toronto Blue Jay radar now. Oh boy. Now, everydayers know that I was already in for a Tim Anderson edition. Not like this, not to replace Bo, but anyway, I was already excited about Tim Anderson myself. This guy, this is a veteran, and Tim Anderson's the sort of player that plays his best when he is engaged, motivated, and inspired. And I think he would be those things with this fan base, with this team. I think he would be those things. Hit 300 in July, always hits well in August, always hits well in September. Need to mention those things because you're going to see his numbers on the surface and be very underwhelmed because he's not having a good season. Everydayers know we spoke yesterday about how this season Tim Anderson could be like last season's Whit Merrifield. Now, again, always hits well in August and September. And something I love as well, Tim Anderson, 7 career playoff games. In 5 of those playoff games, he's had 3 hits. I mean, when the lights are brightest, pennant race, playoffs, when it's go time, for big time production, Tim Anderson comes through. I like Tim Anderson. Again, I'm going to say if you're getting an energized and engaged Tim Anderson, then you're absolutely getting an asset. TA, they call him. TA is going to be an asset for the Toronto Blue Jays, and it looks like he could be coming, very likely. I know a lot of Toronto Blue Jay fans, you see what Seattle's doing there. A lot of Toronto Blue Jay fans want Teoscar Hernandez because the Blue Jays could use an outfielder that can mash lefties, right? I mean, and Teo, listen, Teo's hitting 296 this season. He's got an 883 OPS versus lefties this season. He's an impending free agent, so the price won't be huge. And he's got an 827 OPS, or had an 827 OPS at Rogers last season, and in there had 15 home runs at Rogers last season. Had a home run at Rogers we don't need to deep dive Teo. He's well known in this fan base. I personally, not that I'm going to be upset or disappointed or anything negative if Teoscar Hernandez is one of the additions later or today for the Blue Jays on trade deadline day. I'm not going to be, nothing negative about it. I don't know that I'm going to be super excited about it either. Well, we'll have to see it play out. Once I see him back chumming around with the team again, I probably get more and more excited. And once I see him get that first big hit at the Rogers Center and the crowd going nuts, sure, yes, but I personally, it's Lane Thomas. Lane Thomas. This is part of my issue here. Is Lane Thomas is the number 1 outfielder I want. He's still my dream, one of my dream additions for the Blue Jays that I think they can hopefully afford. But before we move off of that there, and I just want to talk real quick here because here's somebody we haven't talked about here. I did want to bring him up here before I lose all my time here. I did want to bring him up. I can't come off of Jake Berger. I keep coming back to Jake Berger, Chicago White Sox. Could that Tim Anderson trade get expanded and you include Jake Berger? Jake Berger, he doesn't hit for a high average. It's just his 3rd season, but he is having a breakout season. The average could get better going forward. He's hit 25 home runs this season. You need someone to hit lefties. He's got a 939 OPS versus lefties. So he would DH. Berger would DH against the lefties. He would get the occasional game at second base. So Whit Merrifield would remain the 4th outfielder. But the power on your team just really, really improved. He's still got 2 seasons of pre-arbitration, so super affordable and cost pretty cost controllable for the next couple of years as well. I tell you, Jake Berger, everydayers will know. Oh, that was new. He hasn't. No, I've never brought up. I keep coming back to him. It would be a shot in the arm for the lack of power on this team. And you don't want Jake Berger if you want another outfielder to come in because you probably don't want Whit Merrifield. You probably want Whit Merrifield at second base full time. But the other outfielder, again, that I'm really, and everydayers will know, I've talked about Lane Thomas out there in Washington. 27 years old, turns 28 in a couple weeks, originally drafted by the Blue Jays. Now, again, out there in Washington having a career season. Bo and Vlad lead the Blue Jays with 17 home runs. Thomas has 16. He's got a 3.0 WAR. And you need an outfielder that's going to hit lefties. Lane Thomas, 362 with a 407 on base against lefties. Is that good? How about a 1,046 OPS versus lefties? Lane Thomas smashes lefties. Contractually, he's under control until the year 2026. Huh? Oh, my goodness. Lane Thomas. it would be a bit of a price. Lane Thomas is on the highest end of players that I think the Blue Jays could afford. You know, would I love a Lewis Robert Jr. or somebody like that? Now you really get crazy with that Chicago White Sox trade, sure, but now you're going to have to involve a Ricky Tiedemann, and you know, things for me anyway get a little dicey at that point. I would have thought Sam Robersay would have been involved in a trade for Lane Thomas, but you know, he's gone now. Could Washington be interested in some bullpen arms like Yosfer Zulueta and Nate Pearson? Could Davis Schneider or an Addison Barger be involved? I think the Blue Jays could get Lane Thomas. Haven't heard that he's available, but this is the last time we can talk trade deadline before the actual trade deadline comes and goes. So I just wanted to mention that remains my top dream for the Blue Jays. I think he's the top dream's hard to say, right? Like I'd rather they get a Soto or something, right? But of someone who I think could be affordable, I think Lane Thomas is probably at the highest end of what the Blue Jays could afford, but I think he's coming into his own. I'd be really excited about Lane Thomas. 362 with 1,046 OPS against lefties. Oh my gosh. On the big league level, I think we're going to see some big leaguers traded for the Toronto Blue Jays. It doesn't mean they're sellers, but to facilitate some trades and some things happening, I think at least one of Nate Pearson or Jimmy Garcia is traded. Now, I know that might be a surprise, especially the Garcia part. Now, Garcia's contract vested the other day. He would have been an impending free agent, but he had a contract. He had a clause in his contract that if he made 110 appearances between this season and last season, then his contract for next season, instead of being a free agent, it becomes fully guaranteed at $6 million. Well, the other day, I think it was on Sunday, he made that. He got to that threshold, 110. So he is on the books for whoever he's pitching for next season for $6 million. But hear me out on this here now. First of all, every day as we know, what have we been talking about with the Blue Jay trade deadline? Not a whole lot of assets to choose from, to deal from, right? So what in the minor league level, and they just traded a couple, by the way, so even less now. Look at this bullpen depth without Garcia or Nate Pearson. Jordan Romano, Jordan Hicks, Eric Swanson, Trevor Richards, and Chad Green. There's your 5 guys for the back of the bullpen. Hopefully at some point Jay Jackson's going to be able to be back. There's the 6th guy. You're on from the left side, you've got Tim Meza and Yenesis Cabrera. So even if Jay Jackson can't come back, can't make it back, that's still 7 very legitimate arms for the back of that bullpen. Jay Jackson makes it an 8th. At some point, isn't it possible we see either Alek Manoah or Yusei Kikuchi join that bullpen as well? So I just think the depth with Chad Green coming back and coming in and Jordan Hicks coming in, I think the depth that has been created for this bullpen is massive. I could see Jimmy Garcia or Nate Pearson as major leaguers dealt at this later on today. And to reiterate what we've mentioned a few times this week, I mean, speaking of guys on the MLB roster, right? There cannot be any way, please, there cannot be any way that once the smoke clears from this trade deadline, that Kevin Biggio and Santiago Espinal are both Toronto Blue Jays, right? Even with even with the Bo Bichette potentially really bad news, I'd rather see Addison Barger come up. I'd rather see Aravis Martinez come up, to be honest, with Barger first. But Davis Schneider, there's so many things I'd rather see than Santiago Espinal replacing Bo Bichette. And at least one, right? At least one of Biggio or Espinal cannot possibly remain Toronto Blue Jays through this trade deadline. What are you hoping to see the Blue Jays go after today? Or what from a position standpoint? Or who? Do you have a specific player you're hoping the Blue Jays will target today? Drop your comments. I absolutely want to hear from you. And now on the Locked On Blue Jay podcast, third and final segment, let's get into some Trivia Tuesday. The St. Louis Cardinals and the Toronto Blue Jays have gotten together a few times over the past little while, right, to make some trades. So some of these questions will be about Blue Jays and Cardinals trades from the past. And the other questions with the Baltimore Orioles in town will have the Blue Jays and Orioles twist to it. First question. Last week's trivia was about, and I should mention as well, I'll ask the questions, then we'll come back for the answers. Sorry, I should mention that as well. Last week's trivia was all about new Hall of Fame inductees Fred McGriff and Scott Rowland, since they both spent time with the Toronto Blue Jays. Well, what third baseman did the Blue Jays trade to the Cardinals in 2007 to acquire Scott Rowland? January 19th, 2018. Blue Jays traded Connor Green and Dominic Leone to the St. Louis Cardinals for what handsome, there's your clue there, what handsome outfielder? 2018. Question number 3, in 2011, the Blue Jays trade deadline, they traded Octavio Dotel, Corey Patterson, Edwin Jackson, and Mark Zubchinski. 4 players out, 4 players in. Those 4 went to St. Louis. Incoming, Trevor Miller, Brian Tallett, PJ Walters, and what long-haired center fielder who would actually go on to be the Blue Jays center fielder for a few seasons. And that's in 2011. Now, we were talking earlier about Sam Roberse. Well, and speaking of the Baltimore Orioles, well, Roberse, along with another Dutch pitcher and Cuban international player Yosfer Zulueta, were signed by the Blue Jays thanks to bonus international signing money that they had as a result of a trade they made with the Baltimore Orioles. I think this is the hardest trivia question we've had all year. If you can get this, I'm extremely impressed. I will give some clues here. What left-handed hitting outfielder did the Blue Jays trade to the Orioles to be able to get that bonus money? This player was a 2011 first-round draft pick. I believe he was a supplementary pick, end of the first round. He's a junior. He had a 4-year career at the MLB level, 2017 and 2018, the Toronto Blue Jays, 2019 and 2020, the Baltimore Orioles. Who was that player? Pretty much the reason the Blue Jays have Jordan Hicks right now is because of how good Sam Roberse was. Well, the Blue Jays have Roberse and Yosfer Zulueta because of this trade. Who was that outfielder? Question number 5, Baltimore Orioles in town. Who did the Blue Jays, then GM Gordash and then manager Buck Martinez, try to sneak through waivers in 2001 as they wanted this struggling veteran to go down to AAA to work on some things offensively, only to have the Baltimore Orioles, who were in town at the time, just like now, they were in town, so they saw it in the paper. I mean, they read the play. They saw what the Blue Jays were trying to do. They would thwart the Blue Jays' plans by claiming this player off of waivers. And your hint here is the Orioles claimed this player in particular because they wanted him to be the replacement for the retiring Cal Ripken Jr. at third base. Remember, Ripken had moved over to third at this point at the end of his career. And at one time, this player that we're talking about held the Toronto Blue Jay franchise record for most home runs by a shortstop and held the Toronto Blue Jay franchise record for most home runs by a third baseman. He held both these records at the same time. Pretty amazing. And then last question. Now, speaking of replacing Cal Ripken Jr. at third base, well, what longtime Oriole replaced Cal Ripken Jr. at shortstop and ended up finishing his career as a Toronto Blue Jay, one and only season with the Toronto Blue Jays in 2003? Now, give this a quick pause if you want to think one or two of your answers over. Then now we're back. Okay. So again, so the first question was we talked last week about Scott Rowland and Fred McGriff. Well, how did the Blue Jays get Scott Rowland? In 2007, who did they trade to St. Louis to acquire Scott Rowland? Well, that was a slugger that led the Blue Jays the previous season in home runs with 38. I could have given that as a clue, actually, if you didn't know. It was Troy Glaus, the big fella. You remember Troy Glaus? He's a mountain of a man, the big fella. In 2018, the Blue Jays traded a couple pitchers to St. Louis for what handsome outfielder? Randall Grichich, yes, indeed, Randall Grichich. In 2011, Blue Jays trade 4 players to get 4 players back. Who was the fourth player? That fourth player we were looking for was the long-haired center fielder who would be the Blue Jays center fielder for the next few seasons. No surprise that I noticed his long hair, right? Yes, of course. But that was, you may remember, I'm hoping you did, Kobe Rasmus. Did you get that one? Kobe Rasmus. And then we said, speaking of Sam Roberse, and speaking of the Baltimore Orioles, that's how the Blue Jays had Roberse to be able to acquire Jordan Hicks. That's how the Blue Jays have Yosfer Zulueta, who I have big hopes for. I mean, we could see him traded, to be honest, but I'm excited about Yosfer Zulueta's future on the big league level. The first time we had Jay Jackson on the Locked On Blue Jay podcast, he talked about Yosfer Zulueta and his stuff. So these guys were Blue Jays. In the case of Sam, are Blue Jays in the case of Yosfer, because the Blue Jays made a trade to acquire extra bonus money that year. What left-handed hitter did they trade? Remember, I gave you the clues that he was a former first-rounder and he was a junior. 2018 and 19 with the Blue Jays, 17 and 18 Blue Jays, 19-20 Orioles. Dwight Smith Jr. Do you remember Dwight Smith Jr.? That was one of the tougher ones. We talked about when the Orioles were in town. Who's that player they tried to sneak through? And Baltimore Orioles read the play and ruined those plans big time. And just like that, the Blue Jays franchise leader for most home runs in a season by a shortstop and the Blue Jays franchise leader for most home runs in a third baseman was now a Baltimore Oriole, Tony Batista. Tony Batista, yes, the man with the batting stance. Yes, that Tony Batista. Now, speaking of replacing Cal Ripken Jr. at third base, what longtime Oriole that replaced Ripken at shortstop finished his career as a Blue Jay in 2003? One season, the veteran, do you remember? Mike Bordick. Another Trivia Tuesday in the books. I hope you enjoyed that. Hope you had fun with that. That's a wrap for another Tuesday episode of the Locked On Blue Jay podcast. Reminder that tonight's Blue Jays Orioles tilt is, of course, available for you to take in on SiriusXM. Go Jays, go, and we'll talk tomorrow.